I want to talk about a kingdom way of thinking, because that's a different way of thinking than maybe we possibly have grown up to think. Normally we have a worldly way of thinking, and we're worldly minded. Some things good, some things bad. Sometimes, like even in a worldly minded way, we're health minded. So we're worried about our health, and we do things that are really good for us to maintain and to be healthy. That's fine. But all the things of the world are different from the things of the kingdom, and today we're going to be talking about how important it is to be kingdom-minded. We're going to start in Luke 19:11 through 14. And in Luke 19:11 through 14 it says, "As they heard these things, he proceeded to tell a parable because he was near to Jerusalem and because they supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately." Okay, I'm going to pause there because I'm going to give some background right here. As they heard these things, now what had they just heard Jesus do, right? They had just heard Jesus make the statement that the Son of Man, that he had come to seek and save the lost. And they're pondering over this. They're going through their mind, what does this mean? This is what the mission is. This is what Jesus is saying the mission is. And as they're pondering over this, he's looking at them, and he has told them explicitly that the Son of Man must die, and that the Son of Man will rise again. And they don't get it, even though he wasn't talking to them in parables, he wasn't talking to them in a figurative way. They're still not getting it. And so he's trying to help them to get it. And it says that they're on their way to Jerusalem. They're actually right outside of Jericho. This is important, because to help them understand, and even if it's to understand at a later date, he wants to give them something from real life to help them understand what he's trying to communicate to them. And so he does this in parable form. They're right outside of Jericho. Now, this is the part where if I start going down a rabbit trail, somebody raise their hands, I will ignore you. But you raise your hands and go, you're going down a rabbit trail. But I love history, and I love what Jesus does here, because maybe we're not putting it together. He's going to tell the parable of where the master, the Lord, gives out this currency to his servants, right? And he does this twice. He does this twice, and I don't want you to get confused, because he does this at two different events. And they're two different parables with pretty much the same meaning behind them. But there's the parable that he gives once he's in Jerusalem about the master with the talents. And then before, right here outside of Jericho, he gives this parable of the master giving out the minas, which is a Greek currency. But in this parable, he talks about the master going off, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, but let me tell you why it's important. They're right outside of Jericho, and what he does is ties into their understanding of what's going on around them. Don't we do that? You ever been walking somewhere and you're kind of aware of the history around you and everything? Not long ago, I found a place that I really enjoy eating, the Jungle Prada Tavern, right? They make really good sandwiches. There's never a crowd in there. You just got to wait for a while, because it's only the owner. And the owner's the one that's cooking. The owner's the one that brings it out. But I love it. But the minute you go in there, you just feel the history around you. And so the moment that I went in there, I'm like, wow, this place feels authentic. What's going on here? Let me find out what's going on here. So, the first thing that you do in any situation is pull your phone out and you Google it, and you're like, oh, cool, Al Capone used to be the owner here. That's really cool. They say maybe some of his stuff's buried up under here. Let's start digging. No, but you want to find out the history of the things that are around you, right? It's part of it. As they're going through Jericho, they're more than aware of the history that's going on around them, and this parable tells us, but we might not understand that. In this time frame, Jesus is going to talk about a king. And he's going to talk about a king or a kingdom that hasn't started yet. The king must go. Right? Let me read that. He says, therefore, a noble man went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and then return. When we picture the disciples and they're a little confused, they're thinking Jesus is going to go into Jerusalem, and when he goes into Jerusalem, all of a sudden he's going to be announced to be king. And yeah, he's been saying all this stuff about the Son of Man must die, but you know what I'm guessing? What I'm guessing is that probably in their mind they're thinking that's like the Mount of Transfiguration, right? They're thinking that he's talking figuratively that him being this person is going to die, and all of a sudden he's going to be transformed into this king, and that the kingdom's going to start, and we're going to throw off the yoke of Roman suppression, and we're going to be great. That's what they're thinking is going to happen in Jerusalem. And he's like, that's not what's going to happen. And he gives them this parable of a nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and then return. If you really read this, you realize this is not how the story tale of becoming a king is in most people's mind. You think, well, the disciples probably thought that it was going to be like King David. When King David dies, they go to a son, King Solomon, and when King Solomon dies, it goes to a son. It just goes through the family. That's how hierarchy of kingdom is passed down. Not for the Jews, not during this time. Hadn't been that way for over 585 years. No such thing. It's not the way kings work. That's not the way kingdoms came about. 585 years it did. But let me ask you, 585 years, what is your history of what authority looked like? 585 years ago, that's not something that really plays into your mind in the here and now, right? In the here and now, we think about elections and stuff like that. We don't think about and make that a part of our reality of what 585 years look like. 585 years, all of our heritage is way back in other countries, right? Like we were talking maybe like kingdoms then, but we don't think about that and transition to that in the here and now. And that's what Jesus is doing. In the here and now, kingdoms work this way. They had client kings. Client kings were whoever the Roman emperor decided to put over those kingdoms. Very well could be somebody's son. Most of the time it wasn't. Most of the time it was an award to a general or an award to a relative of the emperor or something like that. But here, in this area, and this is important because it's important to understand how the disciples would have received this, so hearing it from their ears. In Jesus' time, when he was born, there was a king that the Romans had put over Judea, right? And it was Herod the Great. Now, we might recall that Herod the Great was the same person that was the client king over this area that the Rome had established, and he's the person that the wise men come up to and they're like, have you heard the tale of Jesus? And he's like, well, I decree that all the males in this area will be killed. That's Herod the Great. Now, in history, Herod the Great was remembered for being a great architectural king. He built so many things in different cities for Rome and stuff like that. He was well thought of in Rome. When Herod the Great died, there were several people that were in consideration to become king of Judea. Two of those people were his sons. One of his sons, Archelaus, was one, and Antipas was another, and then there was a general that was being considered. There were several people that were being considered by the emperor, but the person I'm going to talk about is Archelaus. Archelaus, he wound up being the king for a small amount of time. But when his father died, he had to petition the emperor to be king. So he puts on these white robes, he goes to the temple there in Jerusalem, and he tries to make the people side with him. Even though his father was a horrible person, he's like, if the people side with me, the emperor will give me this kingdom. And so he tries to appease them, and he's like, yeah, I know my father did some horrible things, and they're having this celebration and stuff like that, and he's paying for all of this stuff, and he's got his servants out there spreading money out amongst the people, trying to build up the confidence of the people so that he might get this position. The people are not going along with it at all. And all of a sudden they start kind of getting vocal, and they're protesting this, and they're like, we don't want anything of Herod's. And one day, he just flips a switch and slaughters 3,000. 3,000. and he subjects them to terror. And then he goes off to Rome. And as he goes off to Rome to petition the emperor, the Jews send along with him a convoy of people to petition against it. The emperor doesn't listen, makes him the king anyway. His reign doesn't last very long. He dies, and the emperor decides we're not putting a king over this area anymore. They put governors over this area, and by the time that Jesus and the disciples are walking through this area, we are on the 5th governor since Archelaus, and that is Pilate. And you may know of Pilate because Pilate's the one that washes his hands. That's where we're at. So Jesus is walking through this area, and Archelaus, he's the one that established his kingdom in Jericho. So they're walking through Jericho, and Jesus shares this parable, and he does in such a way. I wanted to share that. You might not care about the history lesson, but what I love about Jesus is that his parables weren't some fancy, once upon a time stories. He related these things to real life events so that they would understand, because that's what he wanted. He wanted them to understand the truth of his message. And there was a truth behind his message that carries through eternity that's important for us today. And so he's walking through this area, they're walking together, and he's telling them stuff that would have resonated with them because they see it around them right now. They still feel the impact of all of that. So let me read this parable, understanding what the real life events are and how he related that to him. He said, a nobleman went off into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and then return. Calling 10 of his servants, he gave them 10 minas and said to them, engage in business until I come. But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. So they understood the history and they're like, wow, that's exactly what happened in this area that we're walking. But Jesus is saying, okay, you understand that? That is me. Okay? I am going to my Father. This is what I'm trying to tell you. I'm going to my Father. I'm not going to return for a while. I'm going to give you responsibilities. I'm going to give you gifts. I'm going to give you all these things to establish my kingdom, to work my kingdom while I'm gone. There are going to be citizens. The world itself is going to hate me. They're going to want to rise up against me. But I will return. And then in Luke 19:15 through 23, he continues and he says, and when he returned, having received the kingdom, he ordered these servants to whom he had given the money, this minas, and the minas is a Greek currency. It's about 3 months' wages. Okay, he says he had given the money to be called him in that he might know what they had gained by doing business. The first came before him saying, Lord, your mina has made 10 minas more. And he said to him, well done, good servant. Because you have been faithful in a very little, you shall have authority over 10 cities. And the second came saying, Lord, your mina has made 5 minas. And he said to him, and you are to be over 5 cities. Then another came, saying, Lord, here is your mina, which I kept laid away in a handkerchief, for I was afraid of you, because you are a severe man. You take what you did not deposit and reap what you did not sow. He said to him, I will condemn you with your own words, you wicked servant. You knew that I was a severe man, taking what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Why then did you not put my money in the bank, and at my coming might have collected it with interest? Now he says, I'm going to condemn you, this last servant. I'm going to condemn you with your own words. He's not saying what you're saying is true of me, but he's saying if that's what you know of me, I'm going to condemn you by what you're saying that you know of me. By your own words, I condemn you. If you really believe that of me, this is how you will be condemned. Why did you do nothing with what I have given you? Why did you withhold it? Why did you put it in a handkerchief? Now, as you notice, many people cleared out at the beginning of the message today. I gave them permission to, right? Because there was many of us that were perfect. And it's good of our brothers and sisters that they are. But we remain because we know that we haven't given everything to God. Why do we withhold? Why are there things in our life that we wrap up in a handkerchief and we hold back? Why are there things in our life that we don't give over to God? I listed a couple of reasons, and they increase in their ugliness, if you will. Number one, we have a desire to protect ourselves from risk, vulnerability, embarrassment, name it. God gives us so much. He gives us so much. He gives us so much ability. He gives us so many gifts. He gives us so many resources. There's so many things that we have that we can give. And time and time again, I'll tell you, one of the most valuable things that we have that we can give is time. But we have so much that God has blessed us with. And there's so many things that are in our life that we don't share. Why? Because we're afraid. We're afraid. Why is it that I don't want to go and knock on my neighbor's door? Because I don't know what the response is going to be. Why is it that I don't want to tithe or I don't want to give? Because it doesn't make any sense on paper, right? It makes no sense on paper to give money that I don't already have. Because that's owed out. That's owed out on my second car. It's owed out on my lease. It's owed out on my cable bill. It's owed out because, Netflix don't carry everything. I need Amazon Prime too. It's owed out. Right? It's owed out on all this stuff. So there's just not any portion of that that's left for God. And it makes no sense for me to even try. My time is owed out. I have a family. Do you understand what I'm saying, Pastor? I have a family. They're important to me. So is my time at Starbucks. So are my visits to the gym. So is my personal time. I got no more time to budget. I can't give that. I'm scared to. I'm scared to pray to God what He wants of me because I don't know what He's going to say. If I knew what God was going to say when I prayed a prayer like that, it might be easier. But what if He asked something ridiculous? What if I prayed to God, what is it that you want to me? And He was to come back and say, well, I want you to sell one of your cars and you and your wife are just going to have to figure it out in one car. I'm not praying that prayer. You know how ridiculous that would be if God said that to me? No, I'm afraid of that answer. What if God was to say, I want you to leave this cushy job and take this other job? No, I'm not praying that prayer. That scares me to death, so I'm just not going to pray a prayer of what God wants from me. I will tell Him, I will give Him a list of things that I'm okay with. That's about the best I could do. I'm afraid. I'm afraid to talk to this person. I'm uncomfortable to serve. And so I withhold. And I wrap it in a handkerchief. John 14:27 says, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. The context of this message is that Jesus is telling the disciples that it's not fear that God gives. And He's telling them this in His leaving them. Because He knows the kingdom mission ahead of them. He shared the kingdom mission ahead of them. And He knows that they're afraid, that there are things that they're afraid of. And He wants them to know that peace He is leaving with them. Not only is He doing that, but in the context of doing the things of the kingdom, He tells us, as we talked about last week in the Great Commission, and therefore I will be with you always. He promises His very presence to experience Him and when we're doing those things. And that's a comfort. And that's a promise that He upholds. Secondly, and I said they progressively get uglier, is that we're not just afraid. We do not see the value in giving those things in our life over to God. We see no value in it. We ask ourselves, how does this benefit me? How does this benefit me to do this? Another way we're saying that is we're looking up to God and we're like, what have you done for me lately? Right? What have you done for me lately, God? How does this benefit me? How does going out and sharing Christ with other people benefit me? How does that look for me? How does coming to church benefit me? Do you know that there are so many people, especially in this generation, that go from church to church just because I want to feel the one that vibes with me? Right? The one that benefits me. How does this benefit me? How does God's relationship, how does doing any of this benefit me? And maybe they get to the point, because some people do, is like, I don't even see how going to church benefits me anymore. I don't see what value that has in my life anymore. You got to show me how this makes it better for me. How does sharing, how does giving of my resources, how does my time, how does this add to me? Make my family better. Make me better. How does it make me look? We have this me attitude. I don't like the way Matthew sings. It doesn't really make me feel good inside, you know? That Danny, when he gets up there and talks, if I hear one more southern slang out of his mouth, that's not for me. It doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make me feel good. He's not a good speaker. I want to go hear somebody that makes me feel good every week. I need a good speaker in my life. The me attitude. James 3:16 says, for where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, that me attitude, there will be disorder and every vile practice. When we make it about me, we're inviting in a foothold for Satan. Romans 8:5 says, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. And this is a really good point, because if you're worldly minded or you're kingdom minded, it makes a big difference. Being kingdom minded, nothing's going to make sense by a worldly spectrum, a worldly test. It makes no sense to tithe. It makes no sense to give money. It makes no sense to help anybody if you're flesh-centered. Absolutely doesn't. What? That money, you're never going to see anything again. You're never going to see that money again. There are people that God has given authority to inside the church. I'm one of them. Y'all have been in my presence enough to know I'm stupid. I'm one of the people that God's put as an elder in this church. And when you give money, I'm prayerfully, and Anthony's prayerfully, we're making decisions based off the money that comes into this church. Does it make any sense to you to put money into a church that people like me are making decisions about and you have no say-so? No, that makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever. That's a stupid use of your money by a worldly standard. You know what else doesn't make any sense? It doesn't make any sense for you to take time out of your schedule to go to somebody that may or may not reject you, but you probably won't see again in your life. To just go knock on their door, to drop a cookie at their door. That makes no sense. There's so many more valuable ways that you could spend your time. It makes absolutely no sense. To show up early on a Sunday morning to help set up, or to go back there and work into the nursery or something like that makes no sense. Why would you do that? You could sleep another hour. It makes no sense. To talk to a stranger with the goal in mind that you're just going to share Christ? Not to build up your network, not for any selfish reason, but just so that they might know Christ? That's a poor expenditure of your time. if you're flesh-centered, if you're worldly-minded. If you're kingdom-minded, there's no valuable way to spend your resources, time, energy than the things of heaven. Is this the most valuable way that I can use my time, my resources, and my talent? If you belong to God, it is. Third reason, increasingly more ugly. We just don't believe that it should be given to God. We don't believe that God deserves it because it's ours. Right? We don't believe that we should be given our time, our resources, or our talents to doing things of God other than what we deign to because it's not His. It's not His to start with, it's mine. My money is mine, I earned it. My time is mine, it's mine. I have a limited amount of it, and whatever I decide to share, He should be happy with it. My talents, developed them. I'm a great guy. Smart, intelligent, and I developed them through experience. I was born with them. Couldn't do anything about being this good looking. Just something I got, you know. That's me, that's mine. I'm sorry for the rest of you, right? Confidence, I have a little bit of that. All mine. And what I decide to share, that's mine. But if I don't decide to share, it's not God's, right? That's ugly. But that's how we think. Deuteronomy 10:14 says, "Behold, to the Lord your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth and all that is in it." All that is in it. You know what that means? Well, let me pause because I want to ask you a deep question and you're not ready for it. I've been talking for a while. There's some glazing over the eyes. Y'all are getting tired. So just a minute. Let's wake up. Breathe in real deep with me. And out. Let's do it one more time. Does that feel good? That very breath was given to you by God. Everything belongs to God. Everything. None of it's mine. It all belongs to Him. It's not a matter of me sharing what I have with God. How much of what God allows me to have do I give back to Him? How much of it do I give back to Him? This last passage, it says in Luke 19:24-27, "And He said to those who stood by, 'Take the mina from him and give it to the one who has the 10 minas.' And they said to Him, 'Lord, he has 10 minas.' I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. But as for those enemies of mine who do not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slaughter them before me." Right? There's going to be a reckoning. There's going to be a reckoning when Jesus returns, and there's going to be an accountability of what He has given each one of us and whether or not we even turn to Him. And at that reckoning, there will be judgment. And that is real. That is true. There will come a point in time where we will each stand before Christ when He returns, and we will give an account for all that He has given us. All. And when we stand before Christ, with the talents that we've been given, with the time that we've been given, with the resources that we have been given, I picture, and I don't know what it's going to be like, but in my mind I have a picture. I have a picture of this accountant with the, and that's not Jesus, but over here beside him, they say that there's a book of life, there's a book of accounting. And inside of that, I don't want to come up short. I want to stand before Christ and be like, I gave all that you wanted, all that I could. I want to continue to see what I can give. Let's see. As a kid, I grew up working. And I'm proud that I grew up working. That's not a complaint. I grew up and my dad was he had a strong work ethic. We needed the money, and my dad he put me to work real young. People learn to drive now because they love cars and they want to drive. I learned to drive so that I could go to work way earlier than I was interested in cars. And I would do different things, 13, 14 years old. But when I turned 15, I was already working a job, but I had this idea that I wanted more money. Because it was coming up on 16, I want my own vehicle and stuff like that, so I'm trying to earn some extra money. And that summer, when I'm not at work, I was going to go and cut firewood so that it would be dried out for the winter. There was a farmer, his name was Joe Shipper. It doesn't matter what his name was. But he had land, and he told me I could go in there and I could cut, because they had planted pines several years ago, but there were some hardwoods in there. I could go in there and cut what I wanted to. I'm 15 years old. All I got is an old steel chainsaw that I kept constantly having to work on. I had an axe, and I had a hammer with a splitter that I could drive into the lot. That's really all I had, and I had my dad's 1978 Ford Ranger, and that was a beast of a truck. I thought, man, I'm going to make it good this winter because I don't mind working. I went out in this guy's field, and when I told everybody, this is the thing. When I told everybody I was going to have firewood and I was going to sell it for $50 a truckload. $50 a truckload was a lot of money back then, but $50 a truckload, pickup truckload. I don't know if it was because people wanted to support a teenager, I don't know, but I started getting in orders during the summer. A lot of orders. I mean, a lot of orders. I went out to Joe Shiver's place. I went in there, and there was several problems right off the bat that I didn't realize as a teenager, but I had to go into the woods amongst all these trees, find a tree, fell a tree, chop it up, and take it all out. I couldn't get to the wood with my vehicle, right? So I had to tote it all out. I didn't have anything else. I'm poor. I don't have any machinery. I don't have any mules to drive it out or anything like that. It's just me. I went out there one day during the summer, and it took me all day to cut 2 truckloads. And I had over 100 orders at this point in time for the winter. It was going to take me so many days to do this. And I became overwhelmed. First thing I did is I told people, okay, I've got all the orders that I can fill. Secondly, I came up with a plan. I just went in there, and for 2 weeks, I just felled trees, trimmed them up, chopped them up. I paid my friend some extra money. The next 2 weeks, we brought it all out. The only way, I was so excited in the beginning that I was going to make so much money on top of my job for the winter that when it finally came in, I was like, there's just no way I'm going to get all this done. I was panicked. And that first day that I was out there, my dad came out there. And my dad's gave me so many great pieces of advice in life. But he told me, he said, stop. Just pick up a log and chop them one at a time. One at a time. This message the proper response of a message of owing God, of what can I give God, should leave you with the feeling of, where do I start? There's so many things that I owe God. If it's not, then you need to get on your knees, because that's the proper response. Proper response is, I'm not giving enough of my time, I'm not giving enough of my resources, and I'm surely not giving enough of my abilities to God. He owns them all. But being overwhelmed does anybody no good. You start with one. You start with one. And today, God's calling you to pick up one. Unwrap that handkerchief and say, Lord, I give this over to you. I don't know the answers. I don't know the how. I don't know how I'm going to come up with more time. God, I'm going to need your help with that. Okay? I don't know how I'm going to share more of my resources. They're promised out in every direction. God, I'm going to need your help with that. I don't know how to share my talents with somebody. God, I'm going to need your help with that. But I'm going to unwrap that handkerchief because I trust you, God. And it's yours anyway. And I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give it to you this morning because that's what you called me to do. And I'm just going to start with one. And tomorrow I might pick up another one. But today, this is my one. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to have Matthew come up. He's going to strum just for a second. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads this morning. And as I'm talking about this, I'm asking that question, but it's not me. It's not Danny. It's God. God is asking you that question. Is there something that you know in your heart? You know in your heart that He wants you to share? Maybe you're even at the precipice. You haven't even prayed to God. God, show me what it is. I'm scared to ask, but God, please show me. Whatever it is this morning, this is your moment to reach within and pull out that one thing that you can give over to God this morning. I'm not asking you to go into the Middle East and be a missionary this morning. I'm just asking you to give something to God that He's already given, that already belongs to Him. You got that one thing?